and the meditations of all our hearts and minds be ever acceptable, O Lord, in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I felt a bit of an emotional whiplash this week while reading the gospel. Last week was Easter, and there was joy with the resurrection and the empty tomb. But this week, we're back to a story of frightened disciples hiding in a locked room. A story with two parts, a commissioning from Jesus and the experiences of Thomas, which takes us further into feelings of doubt. Last week, when I preached about the resurrection during the Easter Vigil, I felt excited, and I was able to look with hope to some of the things in our world. This week, I feel like there's a bit of a return to some of the struggles that we face on a regular basis. And in the news, there has been an additional reminder of our mortality with the notice of the death of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. At age 99, and having been a senior member of the royal family for over 70 years, there are probably very few of us who can remember a time before he was a household name. And although he was a household name for many of us, for his family, he was a great-grandfather, a grandfather, a father, and supposedly he was the person who could call the Queen Mon Petit Chou, or My Little Cabbage. I cannot imagine what it must be for her and the rest of the family to lose someone so close after so many years. But I will take a liberty and imagine that Thomas was feeling a similar sense of loss and devastation. This is someone who had invested so much in Jesus, and then all of that was dashed, and he didn't know what to do until Jesus showed him. The wounds of Jesus, the wounds of the crucifixion, represent some of the worst things that the world can inflict upon an individual. And they might be physical, the holes in the hands, the feet, and the side, but they also represent deep wounds of the heart. The agony is not just in the feet and the hands. There is a deep agonizing feeling of rejection by the state, abandonment from friends and followers, and mockery from the many voices of the crowd. And to some extent, the disciples were sharing in some of these wounds, at least the feelings of rejection, abandonment, and mockery. And they were also experiencing the wounds of loss and isolation. Loss and isolation. Wounds that I think some of us are all familiar with. At some point, all of us have lost someone close, and we know that it hurts. And all of us are living in isolation. Now, maybe talking about these different wounds doesn't sound all that comforting at first, but that's exactly how Jesus brings comfort. Thomas needs something from God. Thomas needs a sign. Thomas needs God to give him back that connection, that contact, and even if it's only for a moment and with limitations. And sometimes that's all we get. Amidst the isolation and the loss, God sends us little moments to remind us that our relationships and our faith are alive. In our story of Thomas, there are several gifts. One of the gifts that renews the faith is the wounds. Those holes made from the nails of the cross and the centurion's spear. Impressions made by the world into person. The effects of the world that show that the person of Jesus is human. And we share our marks from the world in so many ways. When we share the stories of our lives, when we share the jokes that we find funny, when we share our mistakes and our vulnerabilities, and when we share the memories of loved ones, we share the marks from the world. Now, showing his marks to Thomas was one of those gifts that Jesus gives in the story, but there is another gift. a gift that Jesus had been giving throughout his whole ministry. The peace that is part of his kingdom ethic. When Jesus renewed Thomas' faith, he healed Thomas's connection to the small community of believers, to the disciples. But the peace of Jesus and the kingdom ethic is a gift that can heal the whole community. And it contrasts another peace that existed at the time, the peace that was known as Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. Caesar Augustus and subsequent emperors marketed the new imperial system as an era of peace. But the idea of Pax Romana is not what many of us would consider peace, and it's not the peace that Jesus is speaking of. The idea of Pax Romana meant that Rome, and specifically her emperor, were no longer threatened by enemies. The problem was that achieving this meant defeating enemies. It meant sending armies to force out other states to submit to the rule of Rome. It meant killing those who voiced opinions contrary to the ruling political opinion. For many, life in Pax Romana meant just surviving. For a few, life was only about acquiring more wealth or power. But the peace of Christ is about being able to live with the difference. It is about the healing the divisions between people rather than eliminating threats, and it is about creating those connections within the community. Now, at first it might sound a little strange that I'm contrasting the peace of Jesus with Pax Romana, an imperial thing, in the same sermon that I'm also celebrating of the life of someone who was so connected with symbols of power in our own age. So I want to explain a little bit. Part of Prince Philip's legacy, the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, and admittedly these are awards that are something I didn't know much about till recently, but of all the many forms of service offered by the late Duke in his life, this is one I'd like to focus on today. It's a program that encouraged young people to develop themselves for not only themselves, but also for their community, but not for the glory of the state. The criteria for the Duke of Edinburgh Awards included volunteering, so their service to the community, but it also included physical development, so fitness, sports, and dance. It included developing personal skills of personal interest, and skills that could be used to serve the community. And it involved a sense of expedition, planning for great journeys and undertaking them to be part of the wider world. When I look at what this program acknowledges, I see some When I look at what this program acknowledges, I see some similarities to the commissioning of Jesus and to the kingdom theology of Jesus. The volunteer criteria in this award encourages an altruism, or a care for the community, and it is very different than encouraging or requiring service to the empire, as was expected under Pax Romana. And along with altruism, the award acknowledges achievement that represent the development of the individual, rather than achievements that glorify and benefit the state. In other words, it's an award that encourages young people to be the best possible versions of themselves for both themselves and their fellow humans. So in this part of his legacy, I see a parallel with that gift of Jesus' commission to the disciples. Now, after Easter, this week's grief might feel like we have slipped back into doubt with Thomas. And as Christians and spiritual people in general, we will wrestle with our beliefs from time to time. This is an emotional movement that we go through that some of us go through on a regular basis. And I think that this makes Thomas a crucial apostle, because although we are all people of faith, we are also people who will struggle with our faith in one way or another at some point. There are times when we are waiting for God, and times when our patience might feel like it's broken, but the patience of God is constant. The story of Thomas reminds us that even when we struggle with our faith, when we feel broken by the wounds of the world, God will wait for us, and God will find a way to reconnect us with our faith, that God will give us gifts. And in this story, we see that God gives gifts of permission to feel doubt, gifts of reiterating the kingdom ethic that Jesus preached throughout his whole ministry. And God gives a gift that shows us when we can see Jesus. God gives us a gift that shows that we can see Jesus in the impressions of the world found on our fellow humans. I hope and pray that these gifts will sustain you in your lives and that they will remind you that although we are separated, we are all beloved of God and we are not alone. Amen.